Tonight, we enter a realm where curiosity becomes danger, where the simple act of stepping beyond a fence or crossing a locked door transforms into something unforgettable. These are not fictional tales written for entertainment, but stories told by real people who dared to trespass into places they should not have been. Some were searching for adventure, others were simply exploring out of boredom, but all of them left with experiences they will never erase from memory. You might think of trespassing as harmless, nothing more than sneaking into an abandoned building or walking across private land. Yet, as you will hear, the shadows hold more than dust and broken furniture. They hold sounds that cannot be explained, voices that echo without a source, figures that watch from the dark, and dangers that are all too human. Each step into these forgotten spaces is a gamble. Sometimes you find nothing, only silence. Other times, you find something that changes how you look at the world forever. In the stories ahead, you will hear about lone explorers and small groups of friends. They carried flashlights, cameras, and the thrill of discovery, but they also carried the risk of stepping into someone else's nightmare. Abandoned churches, farmland filled with strange machines, quarries with warnings that trespassers will be time 065s, and houses where families vanished without explanation. These places are more than locations. They are traps for the mind, stages for fear, and sometimes reminders that not everything left behind is truly empty. So listen carefully and decide for yourself whether these are the results of overactive imagination or proof that certain places should never be disturbed. Tonight, we share 4 disturbing, true trespassing horror stories. Story 1. Abandoned house next to the railroad tracks it began, as many stories of trespass do, with simple curiosity. The narrator describes himself as someone who always enjoyed long walks, not for exercise or socializing, but for the quiet thrill of discovery. Where others might have chosen a park or a city street, he preferred forgotten paths and hidden places, old trails through the woods, overgrown cemeteries, and the edges of abandoned farmland became familiar territory to him. That curiosity, over time, pushed him further. Until one evening, he stumbled upon something different. Near the tracks of a little-used railway line, he noticed a structure he had never seen before. It was a small wooden house, weather-beaten and sagging, the kind of building that looked as if it had been left to collapse on its own. From the outside, it seemed abandoned, unclaimed by anyone, and the urge to step inside grew stronger with every passing moment. As he moved closer, the details sharpened. The siding of the house was warped, boards splitting from years of rain and heat. Windows were broken, their jagged glass still clinging to the frames, while ivy climbed up one wall like a slow-moving parasite. The front door, hanging crookedly on its hinges, invited him in. At first glance, nothing about the place suggested danger, only neglect. And so, driven by the same mixture of recklessness and curiosity that had guided his past explorations, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Immediately, the air shifted. Dust stirred with every movement, rising in thin clouds that caught the dim light slipping through the broken windows. The wooden floor groaned beneath his weight, warning him that it had not carried a living soul in many years. He noticed remnants of furniture scattered about, a chair lying on its side, time 065s, a table missing a leg, and pieces of fabric crumbling into the dirt. Everything spoke of abandonment, yet there was also the unsettling sense that the house was frozen in time, as if it had once been left in a hurry. Transitioning from room to room, he began to feel a subtle tension building in the silence. At the far end of what seemed to be the main hallway, he found something unexpected, a door in the floor, its frame outlined with dust, but the wood itself slightly cleaner, as if it had been disturbed more recently. The trapdoor was cracked open, just enough to reveal a hint of darkness below. At this moment, his curiosity collided with caution. Time 0.95s. Logic told him that basements and structures this old were unstable, perhaps even dangerous to enter. Yet the lure of the unknown was powerful. Why was the door not sealed? Who had opened it? And what might still be waiting in the hidden space beneath the house? These questions ran through his mind as he stared at the opening, listening for any sound that might rise from the depths. The discovery of the cellar door transformed the exploration. What had started as a casual walk and a harmless investigation now carried the weight of mystery. The house itself was silent, but the half-open trapdoor seemed to whisper an invitation or a warning. Time 0.95s. At last, he pulled the trapdoor wider, and the stale scent of mildew drifted upward. The air was damp, cool, and strangely heavy, as though it carried with it the weight of years unseen. With his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip, he lowered himself onto the creaking steps that led into the basement. Time 0.95s. Each footfall echoed in the silence, and with every step downward, the house above seemed to fade away. What had felt like an empty, abandoned ruin now felt alive, pressing against him with unseen eyes. When his boots touched the concrete floor, he let the light sweep across the space. The walls were raw stone, jagged and moist, and the floor was littered with broken fragments of furniture. Rusted pipes hung low, dripping into small puddles that reflected his beam in sharp flashes. For a moment, there was nothing unusual, just the expected decay of a long-forgotten cellar. But then, as he adjusted his footing, he froze. From somewhere deep within the basement came a sound, low, deliberate, and unmistakable. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged across the cement floor. The scrape was metallic, sharp, followed by a pause, then repeated, closer this time. His body stiffened as logic fought with instinct. Perhaps it was an animal, he thought. Some stray dog trapped down here, or the shifting of old pipes under pressure. Yet the rhythm was wrong, too intentional, too steady to dismiss so easily. He forced himself to shine the beam toward the far corners. Empty walls. Piles of debris. No movement. Still, the sound continued, drawing nearer, as if something unseen was approaching slowly, dragging its weight across the cold ground. Every second stretched longer than the last, his heart pounding in his ears, his breath shallow. He whispered to himself that it was nothing, that imagination was filling the silence. But the scrape returned, louder, closer, undeniable. Panic rose like fire in his chest. Without waiting to confirm what was there, he spun back toward the stairs. The wooden steps groaned violently under his rush, splinters cracking as he pulled himself upward 2 at a time. He did not dare look behind, certain that if he turned, he might finally see what was making the sound. His flashlight shook wildly, bouncing light against the walls until it slipped from his grasp, clattering below into the dark, bursting into the hallway above. He gulped the stale air as though it were fresh. He staggered toward the door, boots striking the boards with desperate force. And then, just as he reached the threshold, instinct compelled him to glance back once more. What he saw froze him for a heartbeat. The trapdoor to the basement, which had been flung open, was now slowly, silently closing, as though an invisible hand were pulling it shut. There was no one there. No figure, no shadow, only the wooden panel sliding into place with a quiet finality. That was enough. He bolted from the house, out into the night air, lungs burning, refusing to stop until the ruin was nothing more than a shape lost in the darkness. The image of that closing door would stay with him long after the night was over, a memory that reason could never fully explain. Story 2. Farm with rotten cars. It started innocently enough. Just a group of friends out fishing in the quiet stretch of woods that bordered a wide piece of farmland. The day had been ordinary, filled with laughter, the rhythm of casting lines, and the patient silence that comes when you wait for a catch. That piece ended quickly when a man stormed out from the edge of the property, his voice sharp, his dog barking ferociously at his side. He shouted that they had no business there, that this was private land, and the threat in his tone was unmistakable. The group scattered, half running, half laughing nervously, but the warning lodged firmly in their minds. Most would have left it at that. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. The very next day, driven more by intrigue than by sense, they decided to return. At first, retracing their steps felt almost playful, like slipping past a boundary they were never meant to cross. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that gave the woods a deceptive calm. As they pushed deeper onto the property, what they found was far from ordinary. Scattered across the field and tucked behind overgrown brush were vehicles, dozens of them. Not the rusted trucks or forgotten farm equipment you might expect, but expensive cars, the kind you rarely see outside of glossy magazines. A once white Porsche now dulled to gray, a Bentley with shattered windows, a Corvette stripped of its tires, Range Rovers with their hoods gaping open like broken jaw. Every direction revealed another vehicle in some state of ruin or disassembly, their luxury wasted, their value torn apart. The discovery shifted the mood instantly. What had begun as mischief now felt like trespassing into something larger, something criminal. These cars were not left to rot by accident. Parts were missing. Engines gutted, and license plates removed. It looked less like a junkyard and more like evidence, the shadow of a business that thrived on theft and secrecy. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had walked into a place they were never meant to see. Still, curiosity pulled them further. Near the back of the property stood a she, its wooden frame leaning, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The smell hit them before they reached the door, a sour, rotting odor that made their stomachs tighten. Inside, beneath layers of dust and old tools, sat a freezer. Its surface was scratched, its seal rusted with time. The odor radiated from it, foul and undeniable, the smell of something that should not have been there. For a long moment, no one moved. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What was inside? One of them suggested opening it, but the others quickly refused. The logic was simple. Whatever had been left there, it was better unseen. The group backed away, their nervous laughter thin and forced, trying to disguise the fear rising in their throats. By then, the thrill of trespassing had curdled into Drea, the cars, the freezer, the smell. They were pieces of a puzzle they had no business solving. And as the evening shadows deepened, the realization became clear. They were standing in the middle of someone else's secret, and they needed to leave before that secret found them. The unease that had been building throughout their exploration finally reached its breaking point. As the group stepped back from the foul-smelling shed, the last rays of daylight faded, leaving the property cloaked in a gray, uncertain dusk. They whispered among themselves, debating whether to turn back or push further. And that was when one of them froze, his eyes locked on the tree line ahead. At first, the others thought he was imagining things, but then they saw it too, a figure standing motionless at a distance. The shape was clearly human, tall and still, but something about it was fundamentally wrong. The flashlight beams caught the face, or rather, the absence of one. There was no nose, time 0.65s, no mouth, no eyes, no features of any kind. Just a blank, pale surface where a face should have been. It stood in silence, body facing them, head slightly tilted, as if observing without the means to see. Fear cut through them like ice. Logic scrambled for answer, time 0.95s. Could it be a mask? Could someone be playing a cruel trick? But even those explanations brought no comfort. The faceless figure never moved, never spoke, never gave away any sign of being ordinary. The longer they stared, the stronger the sense grew that it was aware of them, somehow studying them despite the emptiness where eyes should have been. And then, before they could reek up, time 0.65s. Movement erupted to their right. From behind a rusting vehicle, a woman burst into view. Unlike the figure in the distance, she was unmistakably real. Her hair hung loose, her clothes torn and dirty, and yet her eyes locked directly with theirs. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward them, her steps cutting across the uneven ground with terrifying speed. It was not the run of someone seeking help. It was the run of someone with intent, determined to reach them before they could escape. The spell of shock shattered. Panic surged. An instinct took over. They turned, stumbling over the uneven soil, their breaths ragged as adrenaline carried them into the dark woods. Branches whipped their arms and faces. Roots threatened to trip them, and the pounding of their footsteps mixed with the imagined pursuit behind them. None dared to look back fully. The risk of seeing what followed was greater than the pain of blind flight. The forest seemed endless, each tree blending into the next. But eventually the familiar outline of the path appeared. Their lungs burned, their legs screamed, yet they pushed forward, unwilling to stop until the farmland was far behind them. Only when the road came into view did they slow, collapsing in exhaustion, gasping for air in the safety of distance. Silence fell over the group, broken only by the sound of their breaths. No one spoke of what they had seen, because there was no explanation that could settle the dread. A faceless man, a woman charging toward them, the smell of death lingering in their minds. Together, they made a vow, spoken quietly, but with absolute conviction. They would never return to that property, never again tempt the secrets that waited there. The thrill of trespassing had ended. What remained was fear, raw and unforgettable. Story 3. Quarry in Texas. The summer heat had driven the group to seek something more thrilling than an ordinary swim. Word had spread among local teenagers about an old quarry on the outskirts of town, a place with deep water, towering cliffs, and just enough danger to make it irresistible. On a late afternoon, 5 friends squeezed into a car, laughing, daring one another about who would jump from the highest ledge, time 0.95s. They knew the quarry was private property, but they told themselves it was harmless fun. After all, countless others had done the same. When they arrived, The first thing that caught their eyes was not the beauty of the water, but the warnings that lined the path. Rusted metal signs and weathered boards nailed to trees carried the same stark message. No trespassing. Trespassers will be shot. Some signs were faded, others fresh, painted in red letters that seemed to bleed against the wood. Even a makeshift cardboard sheet, scrawled in angry handwriting, repeated the same threat. The friends laughed nervously, brushing it off as bluff or intimidatio. Time, la point 9:35. Still, each step past the signs tightened the tension in the air. The quarry itself was breathtaking. The water shimmered in dark shades of blue, and jagged rock walls rose like monuments around it. The group cheered as one boy plunged from a smaller ledge, the splash echoing through the hollow space. For a brief moment, TUS 0.65s. They forgot about the warnings, forgot about the risk, and let the thrill of trespassing turn into exhilaration. But that illusion shattered when a voice rang out behind them, sharp and commanding. An older woman, her hair pulled back tightly, stood at the edge of the dirt path, glaring at them with unmistakable fury. Her words cut through the air with the authority of someone who had given this speech before. You don't belong here. This is private land. The friends froze, their laughter dying in their throats, replaced by the prickling realization that they had been caught. They tried to mutter apologies, to explain themselves, but the woman did not soften. Her voice grew harsher, echoing against the stone walls. And then, without warning, she reached for her phone, raised it to her ear, and shouted the words that made every drop of blood in their bodies run cold. John, get the gun. The sentence struck them harder than any threat could. It was not the abstract warning of a sign nailed to a tree. It was immediate, personal, and deadly. Panic flickered across the group as they glanced at one another, searching for a plan that did not exist. The idea of trespassing had seemed adventurous only moments earlier, but now it had become a mistake that might cost them everything. The woman did not move closer, but her stance made it clear she expected them to obey, to wait until John arrived. Each second stretched unbearably long, the silence broken only by the echo of their own shallow breaths. The quarry no longer looked like a playground. It looked like a trap. And in that moment, each of them understood that the line between reckless fun and real danger had already been crossed. The air was already thick with feeb. Time, 8.6. But the moment came when fear turned into raw terror. As the group stood frozen by the quarry's edge, the silence was shattered by the deafening crack of a gunshot. The sound was so close, so violent, that it seemed to split the air around them. Before they could react, a second shot rang out, echoing against the stone walls, reverberating across the water, each echo pounding into their ears like a warning they could not ignore. In that instant, hesitation disappeared. Instinct took control. They ran. No plan, no direction, only the desperate urge to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the threat that loomed unseen. Their footsteps pounded against the uneven ground, slipping on loose gravel, crashing through brush, stumbling over roots. Every crack of a branch beneath their weight felt like a signal that gave away their location. Adrenaline coursed through their veins, drowning out every thought except one: survive. The quarry, time 0.65s, which only moments earlier had seemed like a secret paradise, had transformed into a prison. The cliffs that towered above them now felt like walls closing in, and the water's dark surface seemed like a trap that would swallow them whole if they slipped. Behind them, the echoes of the gunshots lingered, feeding the panic that drove them deeper into the trees. No one looked back. None of them wanted to see if a figure was giving chase, or if John had stepped out of the shadows with a weapon still raised. Branches whipped at their faces, tearing at their arms, but they pressed forward. Breath burned in their lungs. Muscles screamed with the effort. Yet fear propelled them further than they thought possible. At last, after what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, the line of trees broke open, and the faint outline of a dirt road appeared. Relief surged, but it was fragile. Roads could just as easily lead to danger if the wrong person appeared. As they staggered onto the path, gasping for breath, headlights suddenly cut through the dusk. For one terrible moment, they thought it was the van of their pursuers. But as the vehicle slowed, they saw not anger, but concern on the driver's face. A young man leaned out, asking what had happened. The group did not waste time with explanations. They begged for help, voices cracking with desperation. Without hesitation, the stranger unlocked the doors, and they piled in, slamming them shut as if the act could somehow block out the nightmare behind them. The car jolted forward, carrying them down the road, away from the quarry, away from the and a woman, and away from the chilling command to fetch a gun. They said little on the ride back. Their hearts still raced. Their minds replayed the flashes of danger, and the echoes of gunfire still haunted their ears. When at last they returned to the safety of town, a silent agreement settled over them. None of them would speak of the details too loudly, and none of them would ever return to that quarry again. What had begun as a reckless adventure ended as a permanent lesson. Some warnings, no matter how weathered or how exaggerated they appear, are meant to be believed. Story 4. The family villa disappeared. Urban exploration had always been their shared obsession. 2 cousins, bound not just by family, but by a restless curiosity, spent weekends wandering through abandoned schools, crumbling factories, and shuttered motels. Each site carried its own mystery, yet none had captured their attention as much as the whispers surrounding a particular mansion on the outskirts of town. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting the same story with small variations. A wealthy family, once known for extravagant parties and sudden fortune, had vanished overnight. No farewell, no sign of struggle, just silence. The house, they said, had remained untouched ever since. Its windows dark, time 0.65, or its halls waiting. Intrigue outweighed hesitation. On a humid evening, with flashlights packed and cameras ready, the cousins parked discreetly along a gravel road and made their way toward the looming silhouette. Even through the trees, the mansion was imposing. 3 stories of weathered stone and warped wood. The porch sagged under its own weight, paint peeling in long strips that flapped like loose skin in the breeze. To anyone else, it might have screamed danger, but to them, it promised discovery. Inside, the air was heavy, stale with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. Their beams of light revealed a scene frozen in time. Plates were still stacked neatly. In the kitchen, a coffee cup, its ring of dried residue untouched for decades, sat waiting on the counter. In the living room, an armchair faced a fireplace filled with ash, as though its owner had once intended to return. Most unsettling of all were the photographs. Family portraits lining the hallway. Their colors fade, time 0.65s, their once smiling faces bleached pale by years of sun. Looking at them was like staring into ghosts, images trapped between life and memory. Moving upstairs, they found the bedrooms in similar condition, Beds remained made, with sheets tucked tightly as if expecting someone to climb in at any moment. Yet not all was intact. Time 095s. One room was entirely consumed by old newspapers. They were scattered and layered across the floor, brittle and yellowed, every page open to the classified ad section. The cousins exchanged puzzled glances, each silently questioning why anyone would cover the floor in this way, and why every single issue had been left open to the same sectio, time 095s. The room felt staged, deliberate, as though meant to communicate something that was never understood. Further down the hall, they entered another bedroom, bare except for a tall wooden wardrobe shoved into the corner. Unlike the rest of the furniture, this piece looked out of place, its wood darker, its design older, its presence more menacing. When they tried the handle, it refused to budge. Locked tight, it stood as the only thing in the house that resisted their search. The cousins debated whether to force it open, their curiosity gnawing at them, but reason pulled them back. Breaking it could draw attention, and besides, some secrets were better left concealed. In that moment, as they stood staring at the stubborn wardrobe, the house seemed to shift around them. What had been curiosity turned into unease. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the broken windows reminded them that they were trespassing, not just on property, but on a mystery that had never been solved. The cousins had nearly finished exploring the upper floors when one of them noticed a narrow hallway leading toward the back of the kitchen. At the end stood a door, its paint chipped, its handle rusted, and when they pulled it open, a breath of damp, heavy air rose from the darkness below. A staircase descended into the basement. They exchanged a quick glance, the same glance they had shared at the start of countless explorations. Curiosity won again. Each step creaked beneath their weight, threatening to collapse. Dust fell in small showers as they moved low, time 0.65s, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the darkness. The basement walls were thick stone, slick with moisture, the air heavy with mildew and silence. For a moment, it seemed like any other cellar. Broken shelves, collapsed boxes, fragments of forgotten furniture. But as they paused to examine the specs, time 0.65s, a sound disrupted the stillness, faint, deliberate, and chilling. Above them, on the floor directly overhead, footsteps began to move. Slow, steady, measured. The cousins froze, holding their breath, their beams of light shaking slightly in their hands. The steps traveled across the floorboards in the exact rhythm of someone pacing, back and forth, directly above the basement door. The house, long thought abandoned, now betrayed the unmistakable presence of someone or something still inside. Their instincts screamed to retreat, but before either could acquiesce, time 065s, the sound stopped. A silence heavier than before filled the air, pressing against their ears. And then came the final blow. The basement door above creaked open with a long, deliberate groan. Light spilled faintly down the stairs, outlining the silhouette of a figure that filled the doorway. It stood motionless, tall and unnervingly still, its head tilted slightly to one side, like a predator studying prey. From their angle, no features could be seen, only the solid outline of a human form. Neither cousin dared to move, terrified that even the smallest sound would draw it closer. Seconds stretched into what felt like minuto shem time, 0.65s. The silence punctuated only by the pounding of their own hearts. Finally, survival instinct shattered their paralysis. Without speaking, they turned and bolted toward the stairs, pushing past each other in their desperation to escape. Their feet thundered upward, their shoulders brushing against the damp walls. The air around them filled with panic. As they burst into the hallway, they dared not look back to see if the figure followed. Every nerve told them that, if they turned, if they hesitated even for a second, they would never leave the house alive. They sprinted through the rooms, past the photographs, past the furniture frozen in time, and out into the night. Only when the mansion was far behind them did they finally stop, lungs burning, legs trembling. Neither spoke. The silence between them was absolute, not born of calm, but of something deeper: shock, fear, and the unspoken knowledge that words could never explain what they had seen. The drive home was wordless. The car moved through the night with only the hum of the engine breaking the stillness. Yet, in their minds, the image replayed endlessly. The tall figure, the tilted head, the weight of its unseen gaze. That silence on the road was not relief. It was the silence of two people who knew they had trespassed into a mystery too dark to face again, and who carried with them the haunting certainty that the mansion was not empty after all. As the final story fades, what remains is not simply entertainment, but a collection of warnings carved out of fear and memory. 4 separate journeys, taken by different people in different places, yet bound together by the same theme: trespassing into the unknown is never harmless. Time, 0.95s. Each tale began with curiosity, a walk through the woods, a fishing trip gone wrong, the temptation of a quarry on a hot day, or the lure of an abandoned mansion whispered about in town. And each tale ended the same way, with terror, confusion, and experiences that could never be explained or forgotten. When we step into places we do not belong, we take on 2 forms of danger. The first is obvious, and it comes from the laws that guard private property. A sign that says "no trespassing" is not a suggestion. It is a boundary, one that, when crossed, carries real consequences: legal trouble, confrontation with owners, even threats of violence. The young people at the quarry learned that lesson in the most terrifying way possible, when a simple act of mischief nearly ended in tragedy at the sound of gunfire. The second danger is harder to define, but no less real. It is the danger of what cannot be predicted, the danger of mysteries that linger in places left behind. An empty church with a hidden tunnel, a farm scattered with rotting luxury cars, a freezer reeking of decay, or a mansion where footsteps echo though no one is there. These are not just physical spaces. They are thresholds where logic begins to fail, where the ordinary gives way to the uncanny. To enter them is to risk not only your safety, but also your peace of God's mind. Because once you see something you cannot explain, you can never unsee it. So perhaps these stories serve as both caution and reminder. Caution, because trespassing is never worth the risk, whether the threat comes from people with guns or from something unseen in the dark. And reminder, because curiosity, while natural, can easily lead us to places where we do not belong. For some, the scars are physical. For others, they are invisible, etched in sleepless nights and the memory of a sound, a figure, or a door that seemed to close by itself. Now the question turns to you, the April listener. Have you ever stepped into a place you were not supposed to be? Have you ever felt that strange chill of realizing you were not alone, even when no one else was in sight? Share your experiences in the comments, whether they are small or terrifying, because every story adds to the larger picture of why we fear the unknown. In the end, these accounts remind us of a simple truth. When you cross a forbidden threshold, You might not always find what you are looking for, but you will always find something. And sometimes, that something will follow you long after you leave.